Hello, Internet. This is Matthew, and welcome to the Philosopher's Guide to the Apocalypse. This is not, as you might suppose, a podcast about surviving the zombie apocalypse. If that happens, all hope is lost, and you should run into the horde of zombies. No, this is a podcast in which a variety of subjects will be examined using philosophy in the hopes of gaining greater insight and perspective. This podcast won't solve all your problems, but it will make you think. Your mileage may vary. Normies, not allowed. Alrighty. Episode 6. Here we go. I still haven't decided on some intro or outro music or something, which I always think makes a podcast a little bit better. So I should probably work on that. And I also didn't edit the last episode. Edit the audio of the last episode. Might not edit this one because I'm lazy. But I'm going to say that now and put it on record. So maybe that'll inspire me to greater things, But I think we should get started because I wanted to talk about sort of what it means to critically examine your own ideas, critically examine someone else's ideas, what it means to sort of form an identity philosophically, what it means to create a worldview, and how how that worldview might change over time and evolve and adapt. And this podcast is called "Why Ideas Are Scary," for the reason that I think thinking for yourself is very scary. I think thinking for yourself is an endeavor which is very hard to do, and it's very hard to do well. It's an endeavor, which can lead you astray. What's the definition of insanity? Voltaire said. I think having faulty propositions and reasoning correctly from them. So yeah, I mean, that's sort of what I want to talk about. I don't know how long this podcast will be. It might be a little shorter than they usually are. So I suppose I should talk about myself because I do like talking about myself. But I've been thinking more about this in the political sphere, in the realm of political philosophy. And I've been thinking about that because I sort of haven't had a political home for a while. So when I was like a teenager, 13, 14, 15 or so, is when I started becoming conscious of politics. And I was just a mainstream Democrat, right? I just I towed the party line without really thinking very critically about it. I just sort of, and my family, most of them are registered Democrats, and most of them are very committed to the party line. So I just adopted that from my family, as people often do. I think there have been studies that show that politics, you often get your politics from your family, and your politics don't often change throughout your life. Whatever kind of politics you started with, it's likely that your politics will continue to be that for the rest of your life. And so I was just interested in sort of finding sources that matched my worldview. I was interested in owning, what I thought were like stupid Republicans and their stupid Republican arguments. It was and I'm not trying to like denigrate myself. I'm not trying to be overly self-deprecating because, I mean, one, that's what a lot of people do anyway. But two, um, it's not uncommon for teenagers to kind of to take a position and to take it dogmatically. Um, you're not your critical thinking skills uh, develop slowly over time. And in fact, I'm 21, which means my brain still hasn't fully developed, and my critical thinking capacity isn't at its peak. But that's where I was. And as I thought more about politics, and uh, as I thought more about politics, I sort of realized that um, you can't really say that, or you can't really toe the party line and be intellectually honest. And I just say that because reality generally does not follow the party line, right? Reality is not really concerned with whatever ideology you're committed to emotionally. Reality is reality. And so, I'm someone who is able to carry to make a logical argument and is able to listen to other people's logical arguments and evaluate them. So, I started evaluating a lot of arguments from people on the left, and I became more and more critical of them. I became more and more of a sort of a dissident member or an oppositional member of the left. I was, I no longer had this certainty of Democrats right, Republicans wrong, Democrats good, Republicans bad. And I can go to bed soundly at night on that basis. And I think actually one of the first, I think it's the second video I made on my channel. Actually, I could probably look that up right now. The second video on my channel, it was about, okay. It's, well, I don't remember if it was this one. There's a couple. The second video I made is called The Politics of the Future. And then the third one is My Political Background. I don't remember. It could have been the first or the second one. But in one of those videos, I say that I'm no longer a liberal. I say that political label no longer means anything to me. It no longer feels like it encompasses my views. And I think that there are issues that we're facing in the modern world that aren't going to be solved by a liberalism, both in terms of policy and in terms of sort of attitude and outlook. So I think I also add probably in that same video that I think therefore I'm some radical leftist. I don't know if I'm a Marxist. I don't know if I'm an anarchist, but I'm some, far lefty because I think the liberals have failed. And so I'm going to go even farther left to, because I don't think the right has answers. So if liberals aren't the answer, then obviously it's far left. And I sort of said that, well, I said it for a couple of reasons. I mean, I said it for a couple of reasons. But it's probably premature to say that, in the sense that, I'm still, that was a couple of years ago. So it's I'm still just kind of beginning to look at some of these far left texts. So I can't really call myself an anarchist or a Marxist in any qualified sense. Because I really need to study Marxism and anarchism more. I really need to look at, I guess, what is called leftist theory before I can say, oh yeah, that's exactly what I believe. I shouldn't really defend something if I don't know much about it. And then the other, I think, thought in my mind was sort of a pragmatic one. It was, well, I'm going to call myself far left because I want to distinguish myself from Democrats. And nobody, unless you're Eric Weinstein, unless you're part of the intellectual dark web and you're obsessed with cancel culture and political correctness, nobody's going to look at the Democrats, or unless you're a Ben Shapiro type. No one who's sane, no one who looks at the Democrats' policies from a very rational, calm angle will say Democrats are far left. Because they're not far left. And we don't really have a far left party in this country. I mean, even Bernie Sanders, who is a social democrat, which is not, again, that is also not far left. Bernie Sanders would fit in quite well in many of these European countries, because many of the mainstream parties in these European countries are social democratic parties. But for various cultural reasons, even a social democrat in this country is seen as a crazy radical. And so I guess this is my way of saying I don't at the moment have a political label. And I'm really thinking through as best as I can and as logically as I can and as thoroughly as I can all the various possible ideologies, I guess. And just not even thinking to myself, oh, I need to pick an ideology. I mean, I think that's a thought or a feeling that I've had. I think a lot of us, it's not, it's like humans are kind of, what does Aristotle say? Aristotle says we are the political animal. Maybe you should rather say we are the ideological animal, right? It's like other animals, ideologies or ideas, I guess, sort of take on a life of their own. I mean, this is why religion is so important. It's not just, if you're a Catholic, it's not just communion that's important to you. It's not just it's not just the rituals in and of themselves. It is the ideas behind the rituals, right? Catholicism is has a long-standing tradition, and obviously there's various fighting within the Catholic tradition. So it's not to say Catholics have the same opinions. Obviously they don't. But there's like a worldview and a set of ideas that go along with Catholicism overall. Whether you're whatever faction or group you are within Catholicism, you probably broadly agree about any number of things, particularly theologically. Although that's not necessarily that's not necessarily something I have to specify. But anyway, ideology is like very important to people. It's really tantamount to your who you are as a person. It's tantamount to your identity, your ideology. And I really mean ideology in the broadest possible sense. Ideology can be your philosophy of life. Atheism could be called an ideology. Fascism. I mean, then when you think about ideology, of course, in the political sense, then it's also like, fascism, communism, socialism, blah, blah, blah. Those are ideologies. Really, almost any kind of belief system you have could be considered an ideology. Scientism is an ideology. Various artistic movements throughout history. Romanticism is an ideology. Classicism is an ideology. And so it's like, obviously it follows then that many people are out looking for that ideology. They're out looking for a belief system they can attach themselves to that gives them a certain sense of pleasure or community or value, and it helps them sleep at night, basically. That's, I think, sort of what I guess liberalism was for me. So, I mean, I have this feeling, right? I'm not above this, like, kind of like wishing I had an ideology that helped me sleep at night kind of feeling. But I think to some degree, I have come to distrust that feeling. And that's not to say that I am non-ideological. I actually don't think it's possible to be non-ideological if you're a person. I think to be a person means you have an ideology. And I know I'm using ideology in a very, very broad sense. Maybe there are philosophers or cultural theorists or sociologists who would consider my definition too broad and therefore not helpful. But I'm using it in that sense for a specific reason. Because I think it is something which is indispensable to life, sort of indispensable to getting up in the morning, getting out of bed, putting on your pants, going to work, going to school, going on dates with your partner, playing a musical instrument. I mean, whatever you do, like, there's sort of a set of ideas behind it. Now, you could argue that ultimately those are post hoc rationalizations for whatever biological or psychological needs you have. So it might be that, or someone could say to me, well, Matthew, really all ideology is, and I think I'm sympathetic to this, by the way. Well, Matthew, all ideology is a mixture of power or will to power, if you will. We brought up in a previous podcast, and material interest. So whatever ideology you have, it serves, I guess, both of those things: your desire for power, your desire for influence, and the material interest on the ground. So it's not even to say that ideas are the most important thing, ultimately. But it is to say that everybody has ideas, and everybody sort of lives with ideas or lives out ideas, and it is kind of natural to want and need those things. Like, I'm very suspicious of anybody who says, "Oh, I'm not actually ideological." Like, I've gotten over that. I'm better than that. No, you're not. You're really not, because nobody is, and I'm no better. I have ideology. When I say I don't really have a political label, I still have an ideology. I'm just, as of right now, unable to kind of put forward a political philosophy that is coherent. Now, again, that might be impossible. Excuse me. Or not so much impossible, but intellectually dishonest. Sort of a cop-out, right? A system, a philosophical, political system. You could consider that a cop-out because it is simplifying the world. It is trying to put the world in a box and say, this is how the world is. I know how the world works. And if you question it, then, well, you're delusional. You're not in touch with reality. Because if you were, you would agree with me. Yeah, distrust that with. I think anyone should distrust that with all their being. I think systems are almost always wrong because I don't think reality is as easily understandable as people thought it was. So actually, I think it was in there's a documentary about Professor Noam Chomsky. Is the man who is tall happy? I think that's what it was called. Hope I'm not repeating myself. I might have said this before. If I did, I apologize. But in that documentary, he's talking about the scientific method, and he was talking about like science basically before and after Newton. And before Newton, the thought process was this is what Chomsky is arguing. Before Newton, scientists thought of the world as a clock, right? A clock, and of course, a clock is it functions in a certain way. So the natural world was thought of as a machine, and for what scientists were doing was they were like, and this is the hypothesis and experiment, or hypothesis and data a collection. This is how this process works because okay, then what do you do when you're a scientist? Well, you first construct in your mind how that you think that machine should work. Because if the universe acts like a machine, then it has to act a certain way. Because machines, machines aren't magic. I have this lamp, right, shining its light in front of me. The person who designed the lamp could explain to me how it functions, or heck, even I could probably take it apart and sort of figure out, or even just do research on my own and figure out how it works. Same with like iPhones or microwaves or any number of devices we encounter on a daily basis. There's sort of a set of fixed laws that they function by, or there's a set of laws that make them function in a certain way, and then what you do is you try to sort of fit that the either when you're performing experiments or accumulating data, you try to fit the results of the experiments and the data you collect into the system you created, into the mental picture you have of the world. And of course, if they contradict, then you have to like tweak the system in your head until the both your mental construction and the data match up. And if you can't do that, then you don't understand the world. You're not able to explain the world scientifically. You're in the dark about this. And then what and then according to Chomsky, what Newton realized was the world does not work like a machine. You can't think about the world like that. That there are what Newton called occult forces in the world, and so not to say that he wasn't being anti-scientific there. He wasn't saying like, oh, we shouldn't study the natural world. He was just saying the natural world doesn't work like a machine. The natural world, I guess in a phrase you could say, the natural world doesn't make sense. The natural world isn't necessarily intelligible, or the natural world doesn't necessarily function via like rational laws that you would think it functioned by. So I sort of think of the same. I think about ideology in the same way. Hold on, I want to. No, never mind. I think about ideology in the same way because I think many ideologies are, kind of saying, oh, you can't explain the world rationally, or the world does work in rational ways, and this is why, and this is how, and you can govern a country, or like you can implement these policies on that basis. So the Bolsheviks thought they could govern the Russian economy in their own orthodox Marxist, using their own orthodox Marxist thought process. And if you know anything about Russian history post 1917, you know that Lenin implemented what was the new economic plan, and the new economic plan was basically implementing market forces, which would revitalize the Soviet economy, because they realized that, we're not getting the results we're expecting from what the Marx's writings told us we would get, and so now we gotta kind of improvise on the fly, and well, okay, we're not quite getting this communist utopia we wanted here, but we're going to implement these policies, and then it's going to work, and then we can eventually implement the communist utopia. This is I think it's called the calculation problem in economics. There was an Austrian economist, I think, that came up with that, and that was basically his point, right? That you can't, the government can't. It was related to prices, but I don't want to get too. I don't want to go on an economic rant. I guess I bring it up because it is that the point is that the government can't really centrally plan the economy because it doesn't have the necessary. It wouldn't have the necessary information needed to do so, and that necessary information would be price indicators. So I think that's a good kind of thought process to have. I think the world is not necessarily rational. We don't necessarily understand it, and what ideology does is it attempts to simplify the world in ways which I think are ultimately untenable. So I'm very suspicious of the part of me that is that desires an ideology for me to like govern myself by. But at the same time, I don't think that means that we can forego political questions. I'm not saying, oh, ideology is bad, or all ideologies are oversimplify the world. Therefore, politics doesn't matter. No, I think politics does ultimately matter. And I've been really struggling for a few years, really, but particularly as of late. I've been struggling because I've been grappling with a lot of the questions that political philosophers have been grappling with for ages. And I haven't really come to any profound conclusions. I'm still working through. I'm working through these questions live in real time, so to speak. And it's scary. It's distressing. And I think part of the reason it's distressing comes from culture and cultural forces. So I going back a moment to the whether Democrats are radical or not. There is like a set limit to sort of the political discourse you can have in this country. And I mean, Bernie Sanders, I think it can be said, has at least shifted the frame, how far, or he shifted how you can frame political conversations to a degree. I think he and the squad and other politicians of a similar vein have not really gotten much change done. And they've really acquiesced to the party, to the Democrats too much, to the mainstream Democrats too much. But at least Bernie Sanders has, he won at least he won a battle. And I think the battle that he did win is, okay, now at least people are willing to talk about things such as universal health care, universal daycare, $15 minimum wage. Whatever you think about these policies, even if you're, extremely, extremely anti-Bernie Sanders and think all his policies are completely insane, I don't think it invalidates my claim that he has allowed people to have conversations which you weren't really able to have before him. In fact, it was, I forget his name now. I was listening to a episode of Kyle Crystal and Friends. Very brilliant podcast. Keep up the good work, guys. And they were interviewing, if I can find it here, Irami Osei Frimpong. I'm probably horribly mispronounced his name. I'm so sorry, but he's a philosopher. That was actually the first time I'd ever heard of him, and he was sort of talking about how Obama, how Obama was framing like politics, and how he was wanting people to think about the issues, and what Obama was trying to do desperately, and I probably still is say that the Bernie Sanders type policies, well, it's just not going to happen, guys. That's why we had we didn't get universal health care under Obama. We got Obamacare, and that was that's one example of really a whole, or that is a symptom of a whole worldview, which is guys, these Bernie Sanders type policies, we just can't have them. We can't have them. We can barely even talk about them. They're just crazy. They're just radical. I'm sorry. It's just this Obamacare thing, it's about as good as we're going to get. And it's good. You got to, it's good. It gets people healthcare that didn't have healthcare before. And that's, that's about as good as we're going to get, guys. Healthcare that mandates getting it from the private sector. So basically, Obama's whole presidency is him saying, him framing politics in such a way as to say, I'm basically as radical as you can be. You can't be any more radical than I am. And it's funny. I mean, the Republicans thought he was pretty radical. Again, he wasn't. But and the Irami was saying that Obama's going to look like a do-nothing president. He's going to look like a fool if some of these policies, which he was excluding from the conversation, if they get implemented, his whole worldview is going to come into question. So this is my way of saying, if you try to go beyond what is the acceptable framing of politics in your culture, it can take a fair degree of it can take an emotional toll on you. It can be very disconcerting. It can be very frustrating. It can make you feel lonely. It can make you question yourself. It can make you sort of wonder what all this philosophizing is about, or why you should even bother thinking about these issues. Again, you can have a lot of self-doubt, and so that's sort of, to some degree, you could almost say that's what culture's about, right? Culture's about the parameters of thought. And you can't go beyond those parameters of thought, or you're bad or evil or crazy or stupid, whatever negative epithets someone could throw at you. And that's sort of, I don't, you don't have to weep for me. My life is fine, and I'm fine, but that is sort of my experience. And I'll give you an example. So a buzzword in this country is authoritarian. People are quick to distinguish the U.S. government, say, from, quote unquote, authoritarian governments like China or Russia. And they say, we're here in America, we're free. In China and Russia, they're not free because they have these horrible, evil, dastardly authoritarian governments. And again, we're great because we don't have an authoritarian government, right? We're great because we're free. Authoritarian people living under authoritarian government, not free. That government is bad. Now, I'm not here to defend China's government. I'm not here to defend Russia's government. But I've come to the realization that the authoritarian, I'm not sure the authoritarian libertarian distinction, libertarian, not in the sense of the political party, but in the sense of the opposite of authoritarian. I'm not sure it's helpful. And I'm not sure it's helpful to use authoritarian in this negative way. I think that would be sort of hard to, if you say that at a dinner party, I think you're going to get some weird looks. And I wouldn't say it at a dinner party because I think most people, they just kind of look at you like, wait, what? They really wouldn't be able to process it because it's like, oh, authoritarian, that's bad. that's wrong. And sort of the idea that I've had is, I mean, maybe it's bad and wrong. Like, maybe I can grant you that, I suppose, if I really feel like I have to. But, I mean, one, I think the federal government in the states is pretty darn authoritarian. I mean, NSA spying alone, I think, should classify the government as authoritarian. No government before has ever had the amount of that kind of power to really collect all your information, all your tweets, all your Reddit posts, all your YouTube videos, all your phone calls, all your texts, all your emails. Now, if you're insignificant to the federal government, probably it's just going to be stored away in some database and not looked at. But the fact that they are storing that information, and they claim it's for, protection, like, oh, we got to protect you against terrorists, so we got to collect all your information. I mean, that's pretty darn authoritarian, if you ask me. The war on drugs. I mean, that's like an authoritarian policy, which is almost universally condemned nowadays. I mean, there's still some people on the right who would defend it, but most people nowadays are kind of waking up to, even if they, like, in theory want a war on drugs, or if they in theory want some of these drugs to be totally illegal, I mean, they just look at the numbers and say, this hasn't worked. But I mean, that's one of the purest examples of an authoritarian policy in this country. You don't have to advocate methamphetamine or heroin to say that, the government locking you away behind bars for a number of years for doing meth or heroin. Again, I don't know how else to characterize that but authoritarian. I really don't. If you don't have freedom to kind of put in your body whatever you want to without harming other people, I mean, that's a significant lack of freedom. I think most people would probably say that, oh, there's when they talk about freedom, they might think of bodily autonomy, your ability to do kind of whatever you want, as long as you're not hurting other people. But furthermore, I suspect that all social order is authoritarian. I expect you can't get away from quote unquote authoritarian measures. Because I think social structures always have an enforcement mechanism against, whatever behavior the community deems either harmful or bad. I'm a big fan of democracy, right? All right, well, the ancient Athenians like to, if they disliked you, I think every now and then, I don't know how often, but every now and then they would, like, shatter a piece of pottery. And on this piece of pottery, all the citizens, which was probably 25% of the population, it wasn't a lot, and they would write down the name of the person they wanted exiled. Every now and then they just exile someone who was threatened to be a demagogue or was just disruptive or a total jerk to everybody or what, if for some reason they would write your name because they don't like you or want you out of the community. And if they have enough names to enough of someone's name, they just got exiled. Like, bye, sorry, bye. And then Now, if you're a good old anarcho-capitalist, I could hear you saying, well, that's authoritarian because the community is forcing you out. The community is kicking you out and you have no say, and you just have to do what they say. And that's wrong because that's authoritarian. I mean, and I guess we can debate, if you want to have a debate as to whether we should, communities should exile people on occasion. I guess we can have that debate, but I mean, I'm fine with saying that's authoritarian. So I'm fine saying democracies or republics or monarchies or dictatorships. Or I'm fine saying that all governments are, one shade or another of authoritarian. And I'm fine saying that communities even could be considered authoritarian, insofar as, again, there are generally enforcement mechanisms which will discourage certain behavior. And if you do, if you make that social faux pas, or if you do that thing the community doesn't want you to do, then there will be consequences. I've been kind of obsessed a lot with anthropology recently, and I think I said this on Beyond Talking Points. No, I know I did. I was talking about how you would, in our ancestors who lived in hunter-gatherer tribes, they might exile you if you were being disruptive to the group, or they might just kill you. If you do something, again, that's going to either that displeases the group, puts the group in danger, you're either out of the group or you're probably dead. It's like I can call that. I think that's authoritarian. Again, it's not authoritarian if we have to label authoritarianism as government. If we have to use authoritarian only in the sense of a authoritarian government, but in the sense of a behavior which, in the sense of an enforcement mechanism, I think even that could be called authoritarian. There is an authority in this case that, basically the little hunter-gatherer tribe, the whole group is sort of an authority. The person who's being a pest is kicked out of the group or is eliminated. That sort of scares people. Again, I'm not terribly comfortable with this idea. You're telling me all social order is authoritarian? I've been told all my life, no, authoritarianism is bad. I think, there's a lot of issues like that. There's a lot of when you're thinking about, or when you're studying philosophy or political theory or whatnot, there's a lot of trains of thought you come across, or trains of thought that might occur to you, and it's so against your culture that it kind of feels like, oh no, I shouldn't even think about this, and I'm like, there's something wrong with me if I think about this. You internalize those external voices. And I also think about, okay, so as I said, I used to be a liberal, and I still kind of probably fall in line with quite a few liberal policies, but I don't call myself a liberal anymore. And part of the reason is there's just a sort of, it's the attitude, it's the rhetoric that really kind of grinds my gears these days. So I've two examples that I think I've used recently. I don't know if I used them on recording. I'm always repeating myself. I'm so sorry. One of them is the argument you hear against the death penalty from many people I've heard this from both liberals and conservatives, but generally you hear it from the liberals. I heard it from Jordan Peterson, who is a conservative by any definition of the word. But the liberal argument is, well, we shouldn't have a death penalty because we shouldn't give the state that power. And I used to say things like that. And what I thought was, well, actually, sir, if you really think about it for 2 seconds, the state kind of, sort of already has that power. Hate to break it to you. I didn't know if you realized we're killing people overseas with our drone strikes. Our military invasions have most certainly led to all kinds of casualties in across the globe. The governments have made policies about suicide. They've made policies about euthanasia. They've made policies about abortion. The government is the government is designed to think about life and death questions, and to think about life and death questions on a daily basis. So you can't say, oh, I don't want the government to have the power of killing a criminal when they already have that power. Now, I think you can still make arguments against the death penalty. That's just a bad argument. Hello, Slendeli. I don't know who you are. I'm so sorry. But hello. Another example. Someone in the chat for anyone listening to this later on in the anyone listening to the audio version. Another example is abortion. Now I'm pro-life, but I'm pro-choice, by the way. Excuse me. I'm pro-choice. I think it should be legalized. What some argument I've heard is it's not a life. A fetus isn't a life. And I guess I sort of hear that, and what I realized is, I think that's just another nice liberal platitude that you kind of hear spouted off to pat themselves on the back. Well, it's not a life. Okay, then I can feel better about it, because of course the people think of murder as wrong, or people think of killing another life as generally wrong. And so if abortion is killing a life, then obviously it has to be wrong, so it's not killing a life. That's sort of the pro. I guess the other side of it, that's the pro-life argument. They're saying, yes, you're killing a life. Killing a life is wrong. Therefore, abortion should be illegal. And so I'm saying, no, actually, you can be pro-choice like me and still say it's killing a life. You're killing a life. That fetus, if you actually carried it to term, and if it didn't have any birth defects, would probably grow up to be an average, a normal human adult doing normal human adult things. But I still think you can, I suppose for consequentialist grounds, I would argue that abortion should be legalized. And so, yeah, it's just liberals have this. By the way, Slendeli said in the chat, ever went into Stoicism? No, I don't. I mean, I know a little bit about Stoicism. I've watched some videos on YouTube, talked to some people about it, but I actually haven't really read the Stoic texts very thoroughly. But from what I know about Stoicism, not impressed. But back to liberalism. I think that the liberals sort of that they want to feel good. Liberalism is sort of an ideology which is about feeling good. You don't want to feel bad. You don't want to You don't want to think that anyone else is feeling bad. You don't want to, uh, uh, anyone else to kind of have their feelings heard, or you want everyone to kind of have a nice life as best as they can, and you want uh, 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 people. You don't want people to be meddled with too much by the government. Maybe a little bit, but not too much. It's sort of it's always an ideology of half measures. You could do this, but not too much. It was what was it? Connor Cruz O'Brien that said, what did he say? Liberalism makes the poor world sick and the rich world yawn. something to that effect. So I guess to encapsulate that, or to put it into to summarize what I've been saying, liberalism is a feel-good ideology based almost solely on half measures. The liberal doesn't want to rock the boat too much. The liberal wants to get along with everybody, but the liberal wants everyone to have as pleasant of a life as possible. Yeah. And it's like, I mean, most people would say they want everyone to have as pleasant a life as possible. I mean, that's not. There's nothing inherently wrong with that idea, I don't think. But it is as a political ideology. I don't think that's. I just wasn't able to follow that ideology and that thought process anymore. Because along with along with advocating for policies that are at best half measures, I think liberals sort of live in a bubble, in a fantasy world where everyone's nice and everyone can get along, and sing kumbaya, and we're just all going to be one great big happy family. And they don't really take into account certain, like, I guess, truths about the world, or certain, like, facts on the ground that, like, could make life more challenging, or could cause people to be less than one big happy family. I mean, I've said before that I think the welfare state was an important invention, and it definitely did its job when it was created. But I think we are seeing in the modern world, the welfare state is having real problems, and there's a kind of a question of, well, is it going to last? And if it doesn't last, well, what are we going to replace it with? Or are the poor just going to be totally on their own? Like, even if you think the welfare state isn't working, and even if you think it's a waste of, even if you think it doesn't use the money in the best possible way, even if in your view the welfare state is squandering resources, there's at least some kind of, like, social safety net, it's called, that people will be caught by. If that of course, then, but if that goes away, it's like, well, are we going to replace it with anything, or the poor just going to be totally on their own? Do we replace it with $15? Not a $15. Do we PI universal healthcare? I think the liberal worldview is very much being challenged. I think the sort of the tenets that many liberals say they would follow, like internationalism in your worldview. Well, I think nationalism is actually cropping up more, even though globalization has made us more and more interconnected. There are movements springing up in many countries that, well, we don't know if we trust outsiders. We want to stay in this country and make everything great, make America great again, as Trump was saying. And so internationalism is sort of crumbling. People aren't really trusting the EU anymore. People aren't really trusting the the United Nations anymore. There is, I mentioned the welfare state is sort of struggling. Many other there are countries or cultures say that aren't necessarily adopting the certain liberal values. So Slavoj Žižek, the philosopher, has gotten in hot water, I think multiple times, because he makes the argument that, well, we need to accept many refugees from the Middle East because the U.S. or because Europe and the U.S. caused the refugee crisis, but these immigrants aren't going to accept Western values, and there's going to be issues because of that. Now, I think I guess the criticism was that plays into the clash of civilizations idea, which many people feel was debunked. I myself do think the clash of civilizations idea is too simplistic, because I don't think we should really frame it as like Muslim world versus Western world. We should really view it as a conflict about, like, there's a conflict going on in the Muslim world right now, and there's actually a conflict going on in the Western world. I mean, there are people questioning, these fuzzy Enlightenment values. People talk about freedom of speech, freedom of religion, multiculturalism. And so I think that almost might be a more important conflict than the conflict of the Muslim world versus the non-Muslim world. But again, there's like questions of like, well, is the world actually going to accept the values of kind of Western liberal democracies like Fukuyama thinks they will? Not so sure. I think that is much more up for debate, and I think there are people who think, yeah, no, we're not sure we like what you got over here. We might not necessarily like our country. So it's like, I mean, I'm quoting here a professor, Wes Cecil. He uploads videos on YouTube about about philosophy and history and literature and whatnot. But he uploaded a lecture about Russian language and literature, and he was arguing that we're not able really to appreciate a lot of Russian ideas, because what a lot of people in Russia are saying is, we don't trust the autocratic, or we don't trust the government, our own government. We don't trust the Russian government, but we don't necessarily want your Western liberal democracies with a capitalistic economy. We sort of distrust that too, and we're thinking like, yeah, maybe there's another way we could go that's not Russian autocracy, but isn't Western liberal democracy with a capitalistic economy either. So I think that's an issue. I see so many sort of people questioning the liberal ideals. I mean, the economy is really another good example, because I mean, in the classical liberal sense, right? It's like people want free trade. Adam Smith wanted free trade, and many of the Enlightenment leaders who were in that classical liberal tradition, they wanted free trade because they thought it helped the economy. They didn't trust the government to restrict trade. Now, in fact, it did help the economy. Free trade policies. But there are people nowadays who are like, I don't know for sure. I'm not so sure about this free trade policy. We're not so sure about these free trade policies anymore. We're thinking of like, putting up some tariffs. And I mean, the funny thing about, the one of the similarities between Trump and Sanders is they were both against the free trade policies that people like Obama and Clinton were for. Multiculturalism is another issue. I mean, I mentioned that earlier, but I guess to go into slightly more detail, and this kind of ties into immigration, right? So there are people that seem to be arguing that, and this is not a mainstream idea, by the way, and I don't know how much I believe in it, but it's something that it's a new idea that might be worth thinking about. People are saying, well, to have a actually like successful or a thriving kind of culture or country or whatever, or community, you have to restrict immigration, because if you don't restrict immigration, then there can be those clash of values, and there can be a disruption to the community, which can harm it in the end. And I was even talking to a gentleman recently, and I forget his name, but he was arguing that like that's the kind of issue with the U.S., right? The issue is that the fact that we are a melting pot is going to be our downfall, because there are just too many people with too many conflicting value systems, and worldviews in this country, and you just can't govern a country like that. It's better to balkanize. It's better to split the country up, and let people go their separate ways, and govern themselves in their own way. But this is another thing. Again, like I mentioned internationalism earlier. In the past, it was sort of like a nationalism versus nationalism. Well, in the U.S., it's a little different, because actually there were, you could definitely say that, well, this is more in terms of like war and foreign policy, but like there were definitely people on the left and the right that didn't want to get involved in foreign wars. They were like, we don't want this. We don't want our children dying in these foreign wars. Stay out. And there were people on the left who were very upset with FDR, right? Because he got the U.S. involved in foreign wars. So that's actually not really, that wasn't always a left-right issue in this country. But I guess I was thinking more about like nationalism versus internationalism. And I guess you'd almost think of it as like, well, left people, the left is like internationalist and the right is nationalist. But actually, I guess how I really want to think about it is the conflict between self-determination and national sovereignty, and kind of internationalism / globalization. Because I think those sort of conflict, right? I mean, there might be a way to finesse them, perhaps. I'm not so sure. But I think those sort of liberal values conflict. Slundelli is asking, biggest issue in society? I'm not sure I can answer your question, to be honest with you. I mean, I think sort of what I'm talking about here, I guess, could be considered one of the biggest issues. A crumbling value system, or a world in which, a value system, I guess I'd call it classical liberalism, has been dominant, and it is no longer, I would say it's no longer functioning, or it's no longer responding to the problems that it was designed to solve. And I think that's a big problem. And it's one of the reasons I no longer call myself a liberal. Now, classical liberal tradition, obviously, there's sort of a right and left wing. So people who call themselves a classical liberal nowadays are actually conservatives, or sort of either Republicans. In the U.S., they might be Republicans. They might be sort of libertarian types. It's actually funny if you think about it. Anarcho-capitalism is like classical liberalism taken to the extreme, taken to its most pure, I guess, form. I mean, in certain ways, that is, because classical liberalism really is about the individual choice, individual responsibility. I should be able to do what I want to do in economics and my family life and my, take the drugs that I want, have the sexual partners that I want, as long as they're consenting adults. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest issue in society. And that's sort of why I'm, I guess, struggling a lot. I'm trying to figure out, I guess, like why, what I think and why, and how we should think about the issues. How should we frame various issues nowadays? How did people frame various issues in the past, and what were they responding to? What were their concerns? What were the pitfalls in their ideas? What were their successes? What were their failures? And I really haven't come to any conclusions on that. Again, these things I think are always a work in progress. I just happen to have a lot of videos on the internet of me saying a lot of different things and at a lot of different times, and so you get to see in real time someone, I guess, thinking about these things in a semi-public way. But I guess I'll probably wrap up soon, and I guess I'll wrap up by saying, or kind of reiterating that I think it's very difficult to, for one individual to think about these things. And I guess I should say up front, one individual never has all the answers, like one individual is, it's not stupidity or idiocy. It's just the world is too complicated for any one individual to really have all of the answers. So I appeal to modesty. We should all be a little more humble, but not the faux humbleness of a liberal, actual humbleness. The humbleness of recognizing limits. Slendelli left. Well, thank you, sir, for subscribing and leaving comments. I never actually read comments on a live stream before, so I mean, I guess if I don't edit the video, I assume I'll keep them in. Keep them in. I assume the audio version will. I won't edit those out of the audio version if I do edit this. But anyway, I wanted to title this podcast. Why ideas are dangerous. I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm gonna sort of say it in a different way. It's sort of dangerous to those in power, or it's dangerous to the cultural winds of the day. It's dangerous to the consensus. It's dangerous to whatever mainstream ideas are being accepted, if your ideas aren't in alignment with the mainstream. Now, again, I mentioned earlier that I'm a big fan of democracy. Although, unfortunately, one of the black marks of democracy, as everyone knows, very famous story, is the death of Socrates. But the funny thing is, Socrates was charged with impiety, and he was charged with corrupting the youth of Athens. And he was. I mean, I don't know about the impiety thing. I can't read his mind. I don't really know if he believed in the gods of Athens or not. But if by corrupting the youth of Athens, his fellow citizens meant that he was having his pupils question received ideas, he most certainly was doing that. And that can be, you can understand why people in Athens would have seen that as dangerous. Now, I think most of us would say, yeah, that was a tragedy. That's very unfortunate that happened. But you understand the logic, right? I mean, if he was questioning the sanctity of democracy, say, and I guess all evidence seems to point that he wasn't a fan of democracy, then that was like, you almost can't question a democracy in a democracy. I mean, you can, but it is sort of a dangerous territory to have for people to like do so, because you're basically questioning the whole system itself. And if you're questioning the whole system itself, then well, maybe other people start questioning the system. Well, maybe the system will collapse. Maybe someone's going to overthrow the democracy and institute something else. It's like that's just but Socrates' whole life and his ultimate and his untimely death are signs of how dangerous ideas can be. I mean, you can be put to death if you have different ideas than the collective, than the community, than your society and nation. Or, I'm always mentioning Voltaire. I have just a list of people in my head that I'm always referencing because I'm not above hero worship, but I mean, like throughout Voltaire's life, and not just Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau, many of the other Enlightenment figures had similar experiences. But I just like to mention Voltaire because I love Voltaire. Voltaire's whole issue was he just wanted to write. He was like, I'm a writer. I want to write what I want to write. And I don't really care if I offend people. I don't really care if I'm saying things the government doesn't like. I don't really care if I'm saying things that the church doesn't like. I just want to be a writer, left alone to my own devices, and do what it is that writers do. And he only went to, I think he only went to jail or prison twice when he was a young man. But, he was generally always like he was being watched, and like the couple times he had to like flee where he was staying at, because he was going to be arrested if he sticked around. He was just always in conflict, and he couldn't be. He failed at court. Like he wasn't a good courtier, and he wasn't a good courtier because he wasn't the kind of person to be like, oh yes, king, you're great, everything you say is great. He wasn't the kind of person to like be, to say the right things and to not make enemies and to be a good team player, so to speak. He was Voltaire. He wouldn't be Voltaire if he had been a team player in that sense. There's actually a funny story. He was sitting this is when he was a courtier for a little while. He was sitting at the table with King Louis the 15th, and then I think also the Duc de Richelieu. Pardon to any French people listening. I always have to say French names in a terrible French accent. And he said to the Duke, what did he say? I was trying to think of the French. Trajan. Let's see. Oh, Trajan content? Is Trajan content? And he was referring to King Louis the 15th. And the King Louis apparently heard this. He didn't say anything to Voltaire about it. He didn't, call for Voltaire's execution, or he didn't send Voltaire to the Bastille. He didn't say anything about it, but he was definitely shocked and displeased. So, but again, that's another example of Voltaire, just a person just thinking for himself, or just writing the things he wanted to write, and he was always getting in trouble. So it going against the grain, so to speak. I mean, I don't want to put it that way, because it's now, it's like nowadays, in a very individualistic culture that we have nowadays, particularly in the U.S., but it's really spread all to many other places around the world. It's like now people make it the idea of going against the grain and being yourself, and as it's become commercialized. It's become commercialized. It's like I think there's a singer, Ava Max, I think is her name. One of her songs is "So Am I," and but it goes something like, how's it go? Do you ever feel like a misfit? I don't remember the rest off the top of my head, but basically it's a whole song about, like, are you a misfit? Me too. Do you not fit in with other people? Me too. Then there was like also a Katy Perry song about, like, I don't know how she feels like a cog in the machine, but she doesn't want to be a cog in the machine. She wants to be, an individual. She wants to be herself, free in herself. It's like now people are like, now it's like you can't really even say like, oh, I believe people should think for themselves and be autonomous individuals, because it's like that's what everyone's saying. So now it's like the hip thing to do is to say you're an autonomous individual, and you think for yourself, and you don't go along with the crowd, and ipso facto you're going along with the crowd. But the to study philosophy really is to kind of go against the grain, and to not follow the crowd, and to think for yourself. And again, it's very disconcerting, and I struggle with this myself. I struggle with kind of forming my own philosophical identity, like I said, and I struggle with kind of thinking about arguments that really aren't permissible in my culture, but it's like, well, I see some truth in this. I can't really get away from it. I mean, I think more people should do it. I encourage this sort of life whenever I get the chance to do so. And it's hard. But I'm unable to live the unexamined life. I'm unable to not really well, it's okay. I'm not unable. I shouldn't say that. I'm not unable to go to kind of accept something without questioning it, because that's what I did in my teens, right? But ultimately I decided that I don't want to just do that. I don't want to just go about my day not questioning received wisdom. I even though I'm a social animal, and I might have a part of me that does want to go along to get along, there's the other part of me, stronger part of me, I would say, or a more pronounced part of me that's like, no, I'm going to question everything because why should I just assume everyone else is right? All right, well, I've gone on quite a bit. I don't know I never know how coherent these podcasts are, because I don't script anything. I just talk off the cuff for an hour or more, see how it goes. Hope you like it. Apparently I have a new subscriber, so that's good, I guess. But yeah, so if you're Slendelli obviously knows my YouTube channel now, The Anti-Philosopher. If you're listening to this in audio version, now you know about my YouTube channel. I try to stream my shows live on Friday evenings, and then I try to have the audio version uploaded to the various podcatchers on Sunday. I also have another podcast with my friend who's an anarcho-capitalist, which is why I mentioned anarcho-capitalism a couple times. That's called Beyond Talking Points. That also has a YouTube channel, or you can also find that on various podcatchers. And then if you want to follow me on Twitter, I am at Matthew Hazelwoe, but cut off the OD for my last name and add 8. So it's capital M Matthew, and then my last name with capital H, sans the OD, and replace them with an 8. I think that's it. So till next week. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and take care.